Alright. Hello, everybody.
It's good.
We're gonna go over everything important about World War II because it's important. Yay! We got a bunch of guest speakers. The whole crew has pulled up for this one. So we're gonna start World War One. Basically, is a backdrop to the entire Great War period. It starts because of nationalism and a lot of alliances, and it's basically a guy named Archduke Franz Ferdinand from Austria. He is shot by a Serbian terrorist group. Both bullets actually miss, and he's later blown up by a grenade at this parade rally. And then basically a lot of like weird chains happen with people declaring war on each other, and the Central Powers. It ends with the Central Powers being Germany, Austria, Hungary, and technically Italy, but they were actually out of it. So mainly just Germany and Austria, Hungary, being at war with Russia, France, and Great Britain mainly. And as the war goes on, eventually Italy and the U.S. join in, and they actually join with the not with the Allies, with the Trientente, which basically is kind of just think of the Allies, which we'll talk about in a bit. Kind of the same general people, and they kind of break through lots of like trenches, similar to this one. Very slowly. Important things about this war is that battles are incredibly deadly because trenches were horrible living conditions, and because they were basically just throwing people at machine guns and hoping that enough of them made it to the trench to take it. So in between these these large trench systems, there was a place called No Man's Land, and usually there was some barbed wire in between, and people just had to run under machine gun fire and hope they survived. Some of the worst fronts were the Western Front around Verdun, near the Franco-German border. And by the end of the war, Germany is blamed for basically everything that happened, and they're forced to pay most of the costs for the war, which is basically they have to give up the most lands, they have to pay the most reparations, they have to subject themselves to some of like the worst laws, which is because they held like a little transmission from Serbia to Austria. They intercepted it and held it from Austria, so they couldn't complete a list of demands, which is basically what started the war. Like when you really look at the chain, so they're blamed for all of it. And then around this time as well starts the Great Depression. In Europe, this messes with the economy even more from Germany, and it messes with everything all over the world. Eddiel, take it away.
Okay, so the Great Depression. It was the worst economic crisis in modern history, and it lasted from 1929, the stock market crash, until the beginning of World War II in 1939. The causes of the Great Depression included the slowing consumer demand, there was the mounting consumer debt, there was a decreased industrial production, and there was also a rapid and reckless expansion of the US stock market. So when the stock market crashed in 1929, it triggered a crisis in international economy, and it was majorly linked to the gold standard. There was also a rash of bank failures followed in 1930, and as the Dust Bowl increased the number of farm foreclosures, unemployment tops 20% by 1933. There were even some presidents involved in the Great Depression, like Herbert Hoover. So he was majorly blamed for the Depression, and there were even makeshift towns known as Hoovervilles, which were formed because of him, in which people who were of the lower and lower middle class would basically take a bunch of scraps and metal to, just make towns of their own. And then there was also Franklin D. Roosevelt during this time period, who tried to stimulate the economy with a range of incentives, which also included Roosevelt's New Deal programs. But ultimately, it took the manufacturing production increases of World War II to end the Great Depression.
Now onto the start of fascism.
Okay. Fascism is like a government or a system of beliefs where you have one powerful leader or like a very small group that has total control over the entire state. It really works against democracy and believes that the state or the country should be way more important than any individual. Fascists often focus on like extreme pride, so it's fascism is kind of like a weird version of just like really extreme nationalism. Um, they use force and violence to keep control and like they silence critics and push out people who are seen as like outsiders. So that could be anything from immigrants to just people who don't believe in fascism. They try to have like a really strong military, and they really look for expanding their country by force, and especially just getting as much land as they physically can, which was a huge reason for World War II to begin with. It's pretty much just like a mix of strict authority, really, really aggressive nationalism, and just like no tolerance for any other ideas besides what they believe. It came from Mussolini, and it would be implemented in France, used by Hitler, used by Japan, all of like the main powers that would be later known as the Axis powers.
With the rise of fascism, also rose a socialist party in Germany. Eddiel.
So here we got the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, which basically took shape under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. So it was basically a mass movement and ruled Germany through totalitarian.
Totalitarian.
Totalitarian means from 1933 to 1945 under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. It was founded in 1919 as the German Workers' Party. The group promoted German pride and anti-Semitism, and expressed dissatisfaction with the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, the 1919 peace settlement that ended World War I. Because you see, after World War I, Germany was really left in crippling debt. So Hitler joined the party the year it was founded and became its leader in 1921. And in 1933, he became the Chancellor of Germany, and his Nazi government soon assumed dictatorial powers. After Germany's defeat in World War II, the Nazi Party was outlawed. Many of its officials were convicted of war crimes.
To add on to this just a little bit, everything said was completely true, but the reason that they were elected as an important fact is because Hitler was incredibly charismatic as a leader. So he was able to quickly. He was actually originally sent to look at the Nazi Party as a way to see if they were like communists, to try to keep them out with the current ruling government that he was working for. And he went to this meeting and noticed that he actually agreed with a lot of what they were thinking. So he quickly rose in the ranks because of his charisma. And the reason that the party was actually elected primarily was because they promised to reduce the effects of the Treaty of Versailles, which plagued Germany. And what is important about that is tons of people were starving in Berlin and all over Germany. And he promised them bread, and he gave them bread, which basically explains why first he was elected and why people were so trusting of him for so long. Because as they originally saw him, he was solving the problems that had been plaguing them. So they were just a lot more initially trusting, which is why he was able to kind of get away with so much. And as the war progressed, he was able to do even worse and worse atrocities, which we'll get into later. Now, with the rise of the Nazi Party and the other fascists, primarily Italy and Japan at this time, as well as the rise of people who were against them, we have Noah with the Axis and the Allies.
Yeah, okay. As Nova said, we have the Axis and the Allied powers. The Axis powers were the ones that believed in fascism. That's your Germany, your Italy, and your Japan. In Italy, that was mostly led by Benito Mussolini, who really formed what we now know as fascism. His main thing there was he wanted to try to recreate the Roman Empire to what it was before it fell. They were all pretty much driven by fascism and under that collective idea, while they all have their own slightly ulterior motives. For example, we got Germany, which was led by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, which just literally was just trying to dominate the entirety of the world, just by brute force. And you also have Japan, led by Emperor Hirohito. And they just wanted to spread across Asia and the Pacific, like we would see later in the Pacific War. And then we have the Allied powers who were against these ideas. We start with the UK, China, and France, I believe.
Yep.
And then and they were like the first three major powers to declare war against the Axis powers. They all really thought, hey, this like trying to force control like this just isn't good. It's not good for anybody. Later we would get the U.S. and the Soviet entering the war. Soviet was mostly because they wanted. Soviet was because they had like pretty much gotten betrayed by the Axis powers, and then the U.S. was because of U-boats, oil, things like that.
Mm-hmm. We'll get more into that as well later. Some things to mention. If you ever see anything other than these people in the Axis or allies, for the Axis, generally nations, if they had joined the Axis, they were kind of strong-armed into joining. So many Balkan nations were basically told, if you don't join us, we're going to invade you. And some of which took the invasion and lost horribly. And others just decided to join the Axis, but they were strong-armed into it. So they often didn't fully follow fascism. And those nations honestly didn't ever do anything that truly affected world history for the most part. So Axis is basically just Japan, Italy, and Germany. As for the Allies, if you see anybody who isn't on this list or isn't China, a lot of countries joined the Allies by the time that the war was already almost ending. So they just kind of had like a huge influx of new countries who didn't really do anything. I don't know a ton of examples off the top of my head, but I know Brazil was one of them. They joined, but they didn't really do anything. The war was already mostly over. Now, the kind of the starter way that mainly Germany was taking over. I will say right now, for the most part of this war, Italy is kind of useless. They just kind of get beat up by everybody. The people they declare war on, they get beat up by. They win. They have victories, but they're few and far between when you compare them to the Nazis with Germany and Japan.
Yeah, the main thing about Italy was just that they pretty much invented the idea of fascism.
Yeah, so they invent fascism, and then nothing really like super important bar just being with the Axis. So the way Germany initially started gaining land was first they annexed Austria willingly. Because Hitler was from Austria, he was able to kind of gain a large standing there, and he was able to just kind of get Austria to agree to become a part of Germany. Then his next target was Czechoslovakia. Specifically, he started with a place called the Sudetenland, which is a region kind of along the Czechoslovakian border, which had a lot of ethnic Germans. So he used a kind of tactic to tell the Allies, who were at this point kind of against Hitler getting too much more power. He was like, I will take the Sudetenland and I will stop right there. I will not take anything else. And the Allies were like, okay, well, if you're just going to take the Sudetenland and then stop, then I guess you can have the Sudetenland. We won't stop you. And there's actually a very famous, famous showing of Britain to actually talk this out with Hitler. And when they got back to Britain, they actually found that Hitler happened to just invade the rest of Czechoslovakia because he's a liar. So appeasement utterly fails. That's what this tactic was called, where they said, you can have this, and then you could stop. The Nazis just didn't stop for every single time that the Allies said, okay, you can take that, but stop now. So this just never really worked, and Hitler was able to basically just freely get a bunch of the land that he was taking. Now we have The true beginning of World War II is starting in 1936 with the invasion of Poland and the Nazi takeover. Eddiel?
So, the Nazi takeover, basically, so the Nazis were able to like massively take over Europe, mostly through the use of blitzkrieg, which was a tactic of rapid and overwhelming force that allowed Germany to conquer much of their Western Europe in a few months. It's basically like their army or military, and also because of this, their military occupation, in which German troops overran Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and France in about 6 weeks in 1940 May. They also had anti-Jewish policies in occupied Western Europe, places such as Copenhagen and Denmark and other regions. Germany and collaborating authorities had anti-Jewish policies and laws in which it restricted the rights and oppressed Jewish people and citizens in society. And then, let's see, the Nazis also had a massive conquest of Eastern Europe, in which was undertaken to expand Germany and destroy its racial enemies.
After the takeover, we have. So at this point, I know the image is a bit blurry, but this is kind of what the fronts look like. So all of the black is either under the Nazis' power directly. It is currently occupied and is basically a part of them, or is basically just a puppet of the Nazis. If you see here in southern France, Vichy France, technically it is not occupied, but it was a puppet. The north of France was directly occupied. And then you see places like Norway were also being occupied, as we said, Copenhagen in Denmark. And then, honestly, all the black, other than that, is just general fascism. This kind of is what the fronts look like in Europe until 1944, when we talk about D-Day. Spain was also fascist, but they didn't join the Nazis because of the Atlantic Wall expanded. Which I can talk about. I can expand on a bit more later. Then there's the Soviets. They were friendly with the Nazis for quite a while. It is around this time where Operation Barbarossa would go into a play, where Hitler would try to gain a lot of oil that was in the Caucasus Mountains around here, and he was trying to get all the way to Stalingrad and take down the Soviets. However, this would fail because the operation would take too long. Even though it started in the summer, it would take too long and go all the way to winter, and notoriously the Russian winter is impossible for invaders to get through effectively. It is very often that they are quickly defeated after that, or not so quickly, but they are defeated after that at some point. However, that front does take a bit to actually get moving, and the war is held at Stalingrad and Leningrad for a while. Apart from that, there's some movement in the Balkans for a bit, but nothing too crazy. And otherwise, all of the war at this point is happening outside of Europe. There's colonies in Africa, which are fighting each other. Mainly German colonies of Angola were fighting, and British colonies and the French colonies. By the way, at this point, Free France is mainly in all the other French colonies. They are the primary France during most of this war. Apart from that, the only other French people who were fighting the Nazis in France itself were rebels and just like people behind lines. Then we go into Sorry, I'm blinking.
The rising tensions between the U.S. and the Axis rise.
Exactly. Thank you.
Also, we skipped over the Pacific War, but we can loop around back to that at the very end.
Yeah, that's at the end.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So the tensions between the U.S. and the Axis would rise. This was mostly due to interactions with Japan, which would lead. So essentially, the Japanese developed a type of submarine that they would send in international waters, and that had kept like attacking U.S. ships.
There was the U-boats you're talking about, yeah?
Yeah.
Those were Germany who did those in the Atlantic.
Oh, that was Germany.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that made America really mad, And essentially they said, "Hey, what the heck, man? Why you gotta be doing this?" And that was one of the main reasons. Also, this also caused them to cut off oil supplies with the Japanese.
Yep. So yeah, they cut off. So Germany sends U-boats against to stop Lend-Lease, which was when the U.S. was giving money and equipment and supplies to Britain primarily. I will mention during this time, even though no movement was in Europe, I did forget to mention this, there are air raids still going on. So the RAF, the Royal Air Force, are doing bombing runs in main Germany, especially in Berlin. And similarly, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, is going and doing air raids on London. Some other kinds of tensions arising is U-boats aren't just attacking the U.S. either. They are also attacking ships from England. And one of the there was a really bad case where there was a civilian ship that wasn't marked as Red Cross because the British thought that the Nazis would be too much monsters, they would just shoot them. And so this ship is basically made entirely of children. And most of the convoy happened to leave at a certain point, and a U-boat actually struck the ship with a torpedo. The actual people who were in the U-boat came out later to explain that they actually were like horrified when they learned that they had struck a ship of civilian children, and a lot of course, a lot of kids died during that hit. And this is just another reason why tensions are rising even more. The UK is pushing the US to join in on the war, to help them, because they need it. And with the oil, Japan is also very mad at the US because they want their oil, which leads to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Oh yeah, just here. Atlas?
Okay, so Japan being pretty mad at the US for cutting off their oil supply, and the US having their naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Japan decides to go over and bomb the whole place because they're mad. So then they do that, blows up, a bunch of people die, sinks a bunch of ships, and then the US is like, okay, we didn't really want to join the war, but now we kind of have to because we're mad at you guys for blowing up our stuff, and you're like enemies of our allies. So they go in and then join the war in like 1941.
Mm-hmm. So to add on to that, this does cripple basically the entire U.S. Navy for a little bit. The U.S. has major industrial power still, kind of carrying them. However, because they're basically the entire U.S. Navy was held at Pearl Harbor, almost all of it, it was utterly destroyed with the torpedo bombers that the Japanese had just developed. So when they dropped all the torpedoes and destroyed all the aircraft carriers, the U.S. Navy is almost nearly completely crippled. There's a few ships still left. And also, a lot of the planes that were going on those ships were also destroyed because they were all held very close together because of Japanese people on the island. The people at the naval base were actually more concerned about people from the island bombing them because they were scared that they would, have loyalties towards Japan rather than to the U.S. So they huddled all of the planes together to make it more easier to search around the planes and make sure no sabotage from interior happened, but this allowed bombs to actually destroy more planes than they would have if they were separated properly. So for a little bit, the U.S. Navy is completely cut out of the war, at least in the Pacific Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean has a few ships, but not enough to really do much outside of just carry troops and their whatever Air Force was left. In Germany, there was also the Holocaust happening.
All right. Okay. The Holocaust, there's a lot to go over, so we're going to do slightly broad strokes here, going year by year. Starting off in 1933, which is when Adolf Hitler had gotten elected for Chancellor of Germany. Even before then, there had been a lot of hate towards Jewish people and people who were different. In April of the same year that he got elected, there was a boycott of Jewish shops and businesses. There was a law establishing civil service law established barring Jews from holding civil service jobs, university, and state positions. A law against overcrowding in schools and universities leads to Jewish students, a limited number of Jewish students being able to attend public schools. There were public burnings of books written by Jews, political dissidents, and others not approved by the state. There were laws preventing offspring of people who carry hereditary diseases, mandates that forced sterilization upon individuals with physical and mental disabilities, and provided basis for involuntary sterilization of groups targeted by Nazi Germany. And around the end of that year, in October, an editor's law forbade non-Aryans to work in journalism. In 1934, the German president died, and with the support of the German armed forces, Hitler became president of Germany. Hitler declared himself a dictator, and then in November, the German state political police forces into Gestapo's office in Berlin under the authority of his deputy, Richard Hagen. In 1935, Nazi Germany bans Jehovah's Witness organizations. They revise certain laws that allow gay men into any type of workforce. And they make a few more laws relating to Jews and the like when it comes to citizenship. In 1936, March, Jewish doctors were barred from practicing medicine. And one of the first concentration camps were opened on July 12th, 1936. The Olympics. Then in August, the Olympics were held in Berlin, Germany, and there was a show of Nazi propaganda, leading to even more hate around the world. 1937, another concentration camp was opened. 1938, that's when Germany annexes Austria. Let me see. Sorry, I've got my timeline written out here. There's an executive law in August that requires German Jews to bear the first name of non-Jewish origin. So basically they weren't allowed to have their historical names. Then Jewish passports were then forced to have the letter J that restricts Jews from immigrating from Switzerland. And then the night of November 9th was the night of broken glass, a very famous night known all over the world as 7,500 Jewish shops were looted and 30,000 male Jews were sent to concentration camps in one night throughout Germany, Austria, and Sudetenland. There was a decree of the elimination of Jews from the economic life passes, forcing Jews to transfer retail businesses into the hands of Aryans. All Jewish pupils were then expelled from German schools. In 1939, Germany occupied Czechoslovakia I cannot pronounce that, guys. Apologies. And then on October 28th, 1939, Germany and its allies established the first Polish ghetto in Portugal. And a few days later, they were forced to start wearing a yellow band on their arm or a yellow star. 1940s, a few more ghettos were installated and people were moved into them, along with the first mass transport that arrived in Auschwitz I, consisting of 728 Polish political prisoners. 1941, there were anti-Jewish riots held in Romania. Hundreds of Jews were murdered. And from there, Hitler secretly released a law passing that it was okay to start killing Jews, which was the start of the gas chambers. There was a euthanization process to help cleanse the earth and make everyone Aryan. And then on to the next person, I guess. Atlas, if you'd like to take over.
Yay, okay. So, good things start happening because, like, the US and then the British, they're like, okay, we need to stop this. We need to go on and, like, maybe this is getting a little out of hand. Let's go take down the Nazis. So, the big thing with this was D-Day, where the, like, Allied forces, like, again, including, like, the US, Britain, and then something else, they go into France on the shore of Normandy and kind of just make their way through the areas of France where the Nazis had, like, taken over, and bunch of battles, bunch of stuff, killing a bunch of Nazis, woo! And they get to Germany, and etc., more wiping out the Nazis, and then they go to talk to Hitler, and he's dead. So after the, like, Allied forces that want to get rid of the Nazis kind of make their way through, and Hitler then cannot lead the Nazis anymore, then the Nazis kind of just fall after that.
To add a bit more onto just some random facts that are kind of interesting. So the 5 beaches were Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. These were the 5 main points of entry for the majority of the armies. Omaha is the most deadly of all the beaches, as some of the bunkers that were installed on the upper cliffs, they were most recently renovated to have the best defenses, some, like, the most modern machine guns, and Omaha is just undeniably the worst beach to be at this time. Most of the other beaches, they're not good. Things are horrible still. However, they are able to actually complete their objectives and establish their beachhead, their part of the beachhead, within a few hours of landing. Omaha takes almost the entire day, starting from midnight on June 6th. Actually, a few hours after they wished to have started due to a small storm, that made it was easily just the most deadly beach. Any, like, single person who killed the most people probably killed the most at Omaha. On Utah, I will say the U.S. president, Theodore Roosevelt, he was actually on the beach. If I am not mistaken, he was there, which is interesting. Then other things. So the full operation of the actual day of the beach landings paratroopers would drop behind enemy lines to capture strategic points and to destroy things, along with the French resistance. They are sent to capture certain bridges so that they can get their navy into some of the rivers in France. They are sent to capture specific towns that and destroy roads so that the Nazis can't resupply things. They destroy factories. They destroy railroads. They destroy basically anything that could help the Nazis throw back this beach invasion. The Allies know if they lose this, they lose the war. They cannot come back from this. One of the reasons why it was so successful, well, not so successful, but as successful as it was, there was two beaches that they were rumored to land at, which was Calais and Normandy. And through Operation Mincemeat, they were actually able to trick the Nazis into believing that the brunt of the invasion would be at Calais. So almost all of the Nazis at Normandy were actually not suspecting an invasion. A lot of them were even on vacations during the time. And most of the forces of the Nazis were actually at the beaches of Calais. That being said, it really goes to show how impenetrable the Atlantic Wall was. If they hadn't done that, they would have lost. Because even with that little force, they were able to almost destroy the beach invasion and kick out the Allies. This also, the Atlantic Wall, the insane fortifications, that was part of the reason why Spain didn't actually join the Axis powers, because they didn't want to use the money to actually build the Atlantic Wall down through Spain and protect the entire Atlantic. That's most of the interesting facts about the beaches themselves. Apart from that, they just kind of, went and liberated. They pushed through the best they could, and they liberated city after city, town after town, and got to Paris. They liberated Paris, and then from there, it was basically a straight shot, as the Nazis were already failing on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. So the Nazis were kind of just on their last legs, and they got finally pushed back. And then we go to the Pacific War with Noah.
Okay, cool. Oh, let's go. We have Desmond Doss as a photo there. Anyway, so the Pacific War was a war between America and Japan. This was mostly caused by Japan's extreme expansionist policies, which were, as I mentioned earlier, them trying to establish an empire that would go across Asia and the Pacific. And they were really thinking that if they wanted to secure a place in the future, they needed this. There was also a couple other reasons, such as they didn't have many natural resources. They very poor resource nation, so they relied on imported materials, and so they wanted to get control of resource-rich areas. Safe to say, the U.S. did not like this whatsoever, and so they cut off their oil. The oil supply that they were giving to Japan, which was their main supply of oil. They didn't really have another way of getting a lot of oil easily, which was used for so many things in Japan. And this would lead to Japan striking with the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. But they completely underestimated the response that the U.S. was going to have. And so the U.S. pretty much just beat them up. It wasn't too much. There was casualties. There was a lot of casualties on both sides, but it wasn't a very close war overall. You had a couple key battles as they were island hopping almost. Which was the island hopping strategy was one that the U.S. adopted. And essentially it was to bypass the heavily fortified Japanese islands that they had captured, and cut them off one by one. A good example of this would be the Battle of Okinawa, which was one of the last major battles before the Japanese would surrender. U.S. would win pretty much in a landslide. And you would have war heroes such as Desmond Doss, like we see on screen right here, who, even though he didn't use a gun throughout his entire service, he saved 75 people by going into the line of fire and just dragging them out. literally dodging snipers from the Japanese as he was doing it.
So this, with the end of the Pacific War, it did basically end the World War II as a whole. It obviously ended with the 2 atom bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, or some historians also debate that another big reason was there was actually an invasion from the Soviet Union in the north of Japan. It was likely both of these reasons put together why Japan finally did surrender, which was heavily against their entire culture. That kind of was just the end of World War II as a whole. Slowly, peace talks ensued, and everything was kind of just like, put into place as people, as like the different nations, especially the Allies, began to rebuild the Axis nations with things like the Marshall Plan in Europe, and the U.S. basically installed a new, more capitalist government in Japan, giving it a new life. And that's kind of all of the super important things. A few more interesting things. One, I actually did remember, at D-Day, the date was actually very specially picked to not have a storm, even though it still did. And about 2 weeks after the actual beachhead landed, the worst storm in the English Channel's recorded history hit. So basically would have also really messed up the Allies if they had tried to go then, which I believe was actually another day they were planning to if they couldn't or when they did. There was also, with the Nazi takedown, a bit more that was happening there. The Nazis were actually trying to develop many rockets, like the V-1 rockets that they were able to make. They were actually closer to nukes than the U.S. was initially, but due to a sabotage mission run primarily by British paratroopers and the Norwegian resistance, they were actually able to destroy the primary Nazi nuclear research plant that was getting them heavy water, which is a very important material when it comes to making an actual nuclear bomb. There's also, what else? With the Eastern Front, I should mention, basically, the main plan there with the Soviets was they made a lot of pretty bad gear, honestly, but they made a lot of it. They made like T-34s. They weren't really amazing tanks, but they made so many T-34s that you just kind of couldn't beat them. That was basically why they were able to push back for as long as they did, even past the Russian winter, and kind of carry their victory up into Berlin. So then just the quick aftermath is Germany is split. The West is controlled by the Allies in a few different segments. And the East is controlled by the Soviets. And then Berlin specifically is also split into East and West. So Berlin is completely in the east of Germany, but there was a small West Germany enclave, basically. And that was actually one of the big things for the Cold War, which happens basically like just right after World War II, with the difference, the competition in Berlin to see which side could be more economically efficient. Again, we talked about Japan gets a new government and is kind of like pressed in to be more like Western, which it kind of is for a bit, and then they pull, the U.S. and the Allies in general pull out once after a few years. And with the end of World War II, it does basically just go straight into the Cold War. Some of the biggest, most important things that happened here were increases in technology, with things like the atom bomb, but also different kinds of tanks were developed, different kinds of weapons in general were developed. There was, around this time, there was also changes in many countries' cultures, with things like the nuclear family becoming popular in America. There was movies became much more popular all around the world, and they were generally like lighthearted for a bit after the war, especially European movies. And there's just like general change in culture, increase in technology, and the start of the Cold War are kind of the main takeaways from the aftermath. So that is the quick rundown of, well, less than quick rundown of World War II. Thank you to all of the guest speakers, being Eddiel, Noah, Cathy, and Atlas. And yeah, that's kind of it. Bye-bye.